Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! Okay, today we're going to talk about the lost civilization, or continent, of Lemuria. Don, don, don. And you can't really talk about Lemuria without talking about Atlantis. And I guess you got to talk about Shambhala and the underground civilization of Agartha as well. But for context, in this video, we're not going to really talk about the Lemuria or the Agartha that is supposed to be located underneath the Mount Shasta in California. That's kind of a new agey, kind of hippie, kind of cool vibration, kind of, oh, I don't know, drug-induced coma. No, I won't say that. Just, hey, maybe it's just fantasy. Maybe there's something to that. I'm not going there. What I want to talk about is why scientists believe and why geological evidence might suggest there was a lost continent that we now call Lemuria. Well, first of all, if you think the name came from some ancient text or some green tablet of Thoth or something like that, the name Lemuria definitely did not come from any of those sources. It came from a 19th century scientist who was studying fossils of the, what are they called? The lemurs. The little monkey creatures known as lemurs. They're so cute. My kids loved lemurs. And they do look kind of comical. But this person was studying lemurs on the island of Madagascar. And he realized that there are fossil remains or skeletons of lemurs in Madagascar and in India. But those places are divided by hundreds and hundreds of miles of ocean. And that the lemurs could not have gotten to India without going all the way over there to Africa, all the way up around the coast of Africa, through the Middle East, and back over down into the Indian subcontinent. But for some reason, there's no lemur bones anywhere in Africa, anywhere in the Middle East, only in India and Madagascar. So he began to theorize that at one point these two places must have been connected, that the miles of ocean that separate Madagascar and India must have been at one time connected. And that explains why there were lemurs in Madagascar as well as India. Which brings me to another story about the island of Sri Lanka. The island nation of Sri Lanka is just off the coast of India. Kind of in the direction down there towards, like if you're going towards Madagascar, it's first stop, right? It's right there, an island off the coast of India. This island is separated by about a 30-mile shoal. A shoal is like a sandbar. It's an area that is too shallow for ships to cross. And so from the beginning of modern shipping, any ships wanting to go, say, from India around one end of India and back around, rather than cutting between India and Sri Lanka, they have to go all the way down around Sri Lanka, an extra 200 some odd miles, to circumvent the island of Sri Lanka to get on around to the other coast of India. And what modern people wanted to do was create a Panama-type canal cutting through that shoal, that 30-mile area between Sri Lanka and India, to create a shipping channel that would allow modern ships to not have to make that extra 200-mile trip around Sri Lanka. So, I believe it was in the 80s or 90s, they started talking about doing this. The 1980s or 1990s, they started talking about doing this. And in the 2000s, they began to study and plan a shipping canal that goes through that 30-mile strait that separates those two nations. Or, yes, the continent of India, subcontinent of India from Sri Lanka. When they proposed doing this, though, it got a whole bunch of religious people bent out of shape. Because one thing I can tell you about most Hindus is many of them do not see their mythology as a mythology at all, but as true history. That the stories in the Maharata, I think, is the name of one of the ancient Indian books, which talk about Vimana. You maybe have heard of Vimana, flying machines, flying carpets, um, basically laser weapons, wars where missiles are fired and destroy entire city states, and that there's this huge battle that occurs between these Indian gods in these ancient texts. And this little strip of ocean between Sri Lanka and India are at the core of one of their central stories. And it kind of goes like this. On the Indian mainland was a god whose wife was kidnapped by another Indian god on the island of Sri Lanka. Interestingly enough, there is on the island of Sri Lanka a really interesting kind of similar to Machu Picchu, similar to some of these other ancient structures that seem to have buildings and stonework that is impossible even by modern standards. These places with the great interlocking stones and that kind of structure. Well, there is you might call it a mountain or a flat-topped mountain. It doesn't really look like a mesa. It looks like a giant stone in the middle of the desert. On top of this, without any ramp up, without any stairways that are found, any kind of way to get on top of it, somehow on top of this is one of these monolithic structures where it looks like the stone was actually melted together. They believe, some theorists believe, that ancient technology existed to vibrate the rock sonically and create it to basically liquefy into a marshmallow type substance, a structure where the stones could easily be cut and then use sonic levitation to put them in place. That's one theory. But one of these structures exists in Sri Lanka, and they still don't know how they got the giant slabs of stone to the top of it. And the water collection system in this city on top of a rock in Sri Lanka is amazing even by today's standards. There's a giant pool that it was said to have been the god that occupied that land's swimming pool, and it serves as a water source that never goes dry, even in the driest years, and never overflows. That it has a system of drainage so it never overflows and it never goes dry. And we today could not figure out how to make a structure, a water retaining structure like that, it's amazing even by modern technological standards, and it's been there for thousands of years. Once again, they guess at how old it is. I figure they're off by a few thousand years. Most of these theorists, we'll call them, what are they? The archaeologists who claim they know are just guessing. So we don't know the actual age of this place, but it's on the island nation of Sri Lanka. And so back to our story, there was a king in India, a god in India, one of these blue-skinned fellas, and his wife got kidnapped by this other god on the island of Sri Lanka. And this narrow 30-mile stretch prevented one army from marching his army across over onto Sri Lanka. And so they set out to build a land bridge. And this is not seen as mythology to many Indians and many Hindus. It's seen as historical fact. And I believe this all is linked to the war that went on between these various civilizations prior to the flood. Part of the wickedness that God looked down upon in the story of the biblical flood that caused him to destroy the Nephilim, the offspring of the gods and the humans mixed together. So these Nephilim offspring, these God-human hybrids, are at the center, honestly, of this story of the Indian wars, the Hindu wars of antiquity, that involve flying machines and nuclear weapons and everything one can imagine. So this one god set out to build this land bridge that connects Sri Lanka and India by the use of a group of monkey human people. Don't, monkey people. Next you're going to bring out the lizard people. The lizard people. I have to get my tinfoil hat out. But no, according to this Indian mythology that they believe is history, there was a race of monkey people that lived in the woods, and they were recruited by this king god to not just serve as an army to help invade Sri Lanka, but also to build the bridge that causes the two areas to be linked. Now, that just sounds like a cool story. Let's get the monkey people to build this bridge. Some of the information in the ancient story tends to suggest that there was technology, mechanical conveyances that were used to bring great stones and great trees the size of elephants and cause them to be piled up in this 30-mile stretch between these two, between the island of Sri Lanka and India, and creating a land bridge, a man-made or monkey-made bridge that would then allow this army to invade Sri Lanka. Now, what does that have to do with a modern attempt at building a canal through that section? Well, they were about to tear the middle out of that high ground, that shoal, and start shipping through there when the Hindu leaders across the globe started screaming, "No, no, no, you don't." And so the government of India hired, or actually gave the job to one of their high-ranking officials in the government to decide whether that shoal, that shallow area that looks like it's connecting these two areas, and you can see from space, especially from satellites, that it appears that there is potentially a road buried just under the surface of the water, linking the island of Sri Lanka to the mainland of India. And so he set out to basically disprove that and prove that it was just a natural occurrence. That was a natural land bridge there just under the surface of water. It had nothing to do with human endeavors. So he set out to disprove the old theory and just prove that this was a natural occurring anomaly. So they did a bunch of archaeological digs. They did some underwater exploration, some scuba diving, and they came back with some startling evidence that not only proves that it's not natural, but that it is in fact man-made or monkey-made. So this land bridge was actually a man-made structure that in ancient times somebody piled up first logs and then sand and then stone and then sand and more stone to create a 2-mile wide, 20-mile long bridge linking Sri Lanka and India. Now, having said that, that kind of proves that at least some of the mythology is true. Was it monkey people that built this bridge? I don't know. That's what they say. They were right about it being man-made or monkey-made. They may have been right about who made it as well. Now, there is all this theory about, pre-Diluvian world where you have all of these hybrid Crimeas. Crimeas? Yes, Crimeas. You've got the bull mixed with the human to create the centaur. You got the Pegasus, the winged horse. You've got Pan, the goat boy. Goat boy. No goats allowed. So could there have been these highly evolved apes that they were able to basically enslave and cause them to build this structure linking these two land masses? It is interesting to find out that there is definite proof that humans are a mixture of different pre-Homo sapien hominoid apes, and that many of the races are just what manner of are you Neanderthal? Are you Devisonian? I don't know. Anyway, there's all these different non-human ape-like advanced creatures, the missing link as it were, and that all of us in some way have some of this monkey DNA, okay? And that we're all hybrid mixture. and that modern humans are somehow crossed up. And that's something still being proven with DNA. And I'm not talking, this isn't conspiracy theory stuff here. This is modern science trying to figure out the origin of the modern human race. But what you have here is what appears to be a sunken or flooded continent that at one tip is down there in Madagascar off the coast of Africa, and the other one is all the way up in Sri Lanka, almost connected to the Indian subcontinent. And that this might have been a great civilization. This might have been a great lost continent that was covered up in the flood, the same flood that destroyed Atlantis. Dun. So this also leads us to the discussion of the Great War, that once upon a time, according to some ancient texts and stories, and when you start piecing pieces together from everywhere, from Tibet Buddhism to Hinduism to the Bible to the ancient Sumerians and the Anunnaki, the book of Enoch, as we say down in Texas, you start to come up with a composite picture that looks like there was a great civilization in Atlantis, one that is talked about by Plato and other more ancient historians that predate him. And that would be in a shallow area between the United States and the Straits of Gibraltar, which are there in southern Europe. And the line from there to America, there's a shallow area in between. This is known to sailors for centuries. It produces dead spots where there are no currents sometimes. You can get stuck in this dead zone, this shallow shoal that is many hundreds of miles wide in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And many people believe that was potentially the spot where Atlantis was originally located. And then you have Lemuria, this lost continent that is actually mentioned in the ancient Indian texts, the ancient Sanskrit texts. Talk about this lost continent. They call it something else. Once again, Lemuria just comes from this guy that named it that because they were lemurs in both places, and that one time that land had to be connected. It's the only explanation why there's lemurs in both places and none in between, right? There's lemur skeletons in India and in Madagascar, and this guy proved it to me that they were once linked. So that does prove beyond a reasonable doubt for me that there is a lost continent of Lemuria. Now, whether there was a great civilization on it or whether it was just wild like the rest of the world is a matter of deep esoteric study. And a lot of it is deeply embedded in Indian and Tibetan mythology, along with the modern interpretation of a lot of this information that tends to come from people like Madame Blavatsky. Now, it's real interesting that when you talk about Lemuria and then you talk about Atlantis, you're left with yet a third place related to the Himalayan mountains, a place that was said once to have existed as an island, again, in the great Gobi Desert. An island in the desert? What, Sage? What are you talking about? Well, this is fact here, that there are fossils that definitely prove that the Gobi Desert in China was once underwater, and that the Tibetan mountains of the Himalayas, the Himalayan mountains that kind of divide China and India, these mountains were once the floor of an ocean, that some tumultuous event in our past caused the ocean floor to rise up and create the Himalayan mountains. And that you can go into the top of these Himalayan mountains and find ocean fossils because something happened that caused this sea, this inland sea that is now the Gobi Desert, to be destroyed, vaporized, and the bottom of it flung up to create, or at least cover, the Himalayan mountains with these fossils. Mountain sea creatures? Wow. Have I lost you? Or are you hanging in there? So what you have is this island nation that they call Argotha or Shambhala. Shambhala was seen as the capital of Argotha. Argotha was also rumored to be an underground civilization. Some would say that the cataclysm that occurred, that destroyed potentially all three of these ancient sites, caused some of the people in the Gobi Desert Island, that sea that got vaporized, to seek shelter underground. And potentially they survived this cataclysm by building underground or evacuating to what they already had, an underground structure, an underground civilization or city known as Shambhala or Argatha. That, of course, now modern Buddhists see Shambhala as a place, a paradise place, Shangri-La, some place that you can go in your own mind through astral projection, but can't go there physically, where others searched for it in a physical way. Which brings me to a couple of great interest in the early 20th century. This was Nicholas and Helena Rourke. This couple were Russian expatriates who left Russia when the Soviets took over and they came to America. And they went in the 1920s and again in the 1930s on a great adventure, a great expedition high into the Himalayas and northwest from there, in search of the lost city of Shambhala. And some believe they found it. This couple, the Rourkes, were I won't say they were shady, they were just trippy. They were both considered mystics. They were both considered like high priests of the New Age religion, that they're directly related to Blavatsky, the mother of Theosophy, and some might say the founder of the religion that many New Agers and even like Illuminati types tend to believe in. And she definitely was the first to put forth the concept that all religions are related and that we should just unite into one universal esoteric kind of New Age religion where all of the religions are linked, which ties into Project Bluebeam, one of my previous coffee talks, right? So it's all tied together, man. It's all linked. Where's my tinfoil hat? So the Rourkes also are tied to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Not only was he aware of and connected to some of the groups that funded the first expedition by the Rourkes into the Himalayas looking for Shambhala, but also, more importantly, the government funded, under the guise of some kind of erosion of plant study in the Himalayas, the government funded their second expedition back to Shambhala, back to Shangri-La. Did they find it? Did the government know they find it? Did they send them back for some reason? You know, FDR's all hooked up with, the Roswell, pre-Roswell thing. Where did we get the atomic bomb? FDR seemed to have known about aliens, and then later on it said that Eisenhower would make a deal with the flying saucers in 1952 to trade technology for human subjects. Oh, serious don't. Test subjects. That's what all the alien abductions are about. But whether you believe that or not, whether FDR, Truman, and then Eisenhower were all in communication with aliens or members of Inner Earth. We have the whole Admiral Byrd story about him flying in through the North Pole into a little hole in the ice and ending up in an underground paradise. Could he have found Argatha? Shambhala? Potentially. So, once again, the Rourkes were funded by Franklin Delano Roosevelt just before the outbreak of World War II to go back and search for Shangri-La. I mean, do erosion studies on plants. These esoteric explorers and direct comrades of Madame Blavatsky, and definitely believers in this ancient magician, ancient magic, ancient energy, ancient pyramid power, the power of Atlantis. But it's easy to piece together an ancient narrative that might hold water. No pun intended. So you've basically got Shambhala or Argatha in the north. You've got the Atlantic Atlantis Island in the shallows that are now the central Atlantic Ocean. And then you have Lemuria, this connection between India and Madagascar, this potentially huge continent that is now underwater. The story goes like this. All three civilizations were related. All three civilizations were a direct result of the ancient aliens who came to this earth. You might call them fallen angels. That these fallen angels that found the daughters of men in Genesis 6 and married them, and their offspring were giants or men of renown, that they formed these three civilizations. One in the north that was more spiritual, one in Atlantis that was more technological, and one in Lemuria, which was more biological. And they tended to be these people that created the hybrid animal species. Atlantis was more about the flying machines. The Lemuria is probably the ancient India Sanskrit civilization where this giant war was talked about, with thunderbolts that destroyed cities and laser beams and flying saucers known as Vimana. That when looked upon, these Vimana plans, that there's actually blueprints to these flying saucers, that many believe that it's describing a functional mercury-powered centrifugal force. They use centrifugal force, the spinning of the mercury, the liquid mercury, inside of these Vimana to create the levitation. There we go, to create the levitation required to move these Vimana back and forth across the earth, these flying machines. And so you've got the Lemurians or the Indians, you've got the Tibetans or the Chinese, and then you have the Atlanteans or the Anglos, I guess one might say, the Europeans on the Atlantic coast, in the Atlantic Ocean. And these three massive civilizations start fussing with each other. And the story kind of goes like this. Lemuria is destroyed by Atlantis with a giant nuclear war. And it's leveled. It creates potentially this sunken continent, causes the ocean levels to rise. That also, because they release such power in one place, potentially also to the north, to the Shambhala or Garthians up there on the Gobi Desert, to turn the Gobi Ocean into the Gobi Desert and raise up the Himalayan mountains from the subfloor of that sea. That much destruction brought by this weapon launched by Atlantis against its neighbors, that Atlantis did its own self in, causing the earth to shift on its axis, causing all of the volcanoes to erupt at once, and causing the great flood that would flood the whole earth, including Atlantis, wiping it from the face of the earth as well. This is the story of how human-alien hybrids destroyed themselves, bombed us back to the Stone Age, and reset society at ground zero. And human civilization, as we know it, starts in the wake, no pun intended, of this mass deluge, this mass flood. So what do you think? Is the lemur monkeys proof that Madagascar and India were once connected? Is there a lost continent of Lemuria? Was there a lost continent of Atlantis? And was the Gobi Desert once an ocean that had an island nation there as well, known as Shambhala? And did Shangri-La or Shambhala or Agartha become an underground haven for the survivors of this ancient civilization? Does it still exist? Is this the source for modern UFOs and flying saucers? Is Admiral Byrd's diary talking about how he flew his plane into this place and was given an ultimatum by the Argothians in the underworld, in the inner earth cities, that we are commanded to not use nuclear weapons unless we want to deal with them and their flying saucers and their mind control and their telepathy, their ability to read your mind or even put thoughts in your own head, that they seem to have these kind of technologies or spiritual power. Whether it's technology or spiritual power, alien technology or not, I find it very interesting that we're starting to uncover more and more proof that there was an ancient advanced civilization both in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Indian Ocean, and in the Gobi Ocean, which is now the Gobi Desert. Tell me what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to support this channel. If you got a good time from my coffee talk, if it made you think, if it gave you something to go about, help me out, support this channel so I don't have to dig ditches, so I can continue to make videos. If you're supporters of the Sheep Pen Ministry, please don't forget to continue your support this week. It's you guys that keep me making videos, keep my lights on, and keep my mind on God and on ancient times, ancient things, ancient wisdom, ancient knowledge, and how we can apply that to our daily lives. We'll see you next time here on Coffee Talk. All right.